general, but so many of you heard what I had to say before. Hopefully some of it may be helpful to you, but some of it may be repetition. But in general, the format is that we gather, we get your blood pressure checked, your weight, and then the first hour of the program from 2 to 3, we have a talk. Some of the talks I give, there's some invited guests. I think next week Captain verifies, maybe an orthopedist, or the week after, I believe. And then after that we exercise. And today we're going to be exercising with Justin. But so the health topics that we speak about are things that we as primary care doctors at Obesity and I see all the time, and see the downstream effects of problems that have built up for years, and many of those conditions that we see people for, we know there are ways to avert having those problems in the first place. So our goal is to try to help you not get the problems that we're talking about, and so we pick problems that are avoidable or mitigatable once you already have them by making some of the changes that we're encouraging you to make here. And today, can people see this? You see that pretty well? Okay. This is our new logo. We didn't make the logo, but we don't. So this is P3. Y'all can interpret what the design means. But so it's our first day of P3. There's a lot of Hippocrates and Maimonides quotes that I really like. So that which is used develops, that which is not used wastes away. Use it or lose it. But you know that we want you to not lose it. And so today I'm going to talk to you about the health impacts of obesity in this country. When I started this program 10 years ago, it was largely, as you'll see as I talk about this, aimed at trying to mitigate the health consequences of obesity. And the weight problem that we have as a nation is probably the biggest cause of avoidable unhealth and avoidable chronic diseases that we face as a country. Maybe once upon a time it used to be smoking and drinking, but weight has really become the new smoking. It's the problem that we prevalently face as a nation. And I want to put our own, that's not the problem that each one of us in here faces necessarily, but it's such a prevalent problem that I want to talk about it and sort of put into context the health struggles that some of you may be individually having, and to just show you how that is playing out in our society, and it's affecting lots of individuals. But ultimately, what I've found in health is that even though there's a large problem affecting a population of people, you can't help the population en masse. We still have to do it on our own. We're still, the only way to undo these effects is by taking ownership of the things that we control, recognizing the perils that are out there, trying to avoid them, and then hopefully, in aggregate, one of us at a time doing this, with that we can buck against the trend. But I'm going to talk to you about the trends today. So, obesity is one of those words that is easy to receive when you hear it as an insult, and so the pejorative context of that I hope to steer around just by really talking about what that means medically. So what obesity means medically is defined by a body mass index, and body mass index we have calculated for all of you. It's a calculation that you can ask Google to do just based on your height and weight. There's a mathematical formula. It's meters, your height in meters over and your weight in kilograms. What else? I can't remember exactly how you do it. The adult's weight in kilograms divided by the square of your height in meters. You can do that math problem if you like math, or you can just ask Google and it'll tell you. But we have calculated it for each of you. So a normal body mass index is 25 or less, and BMI between 25 and 30 is overweight, and a BMI greater than 30 is obese by the definitions. And there are, another place where I sometimes have doctored is with the NC State football team, and there are some people with BMIs of 30 there who have no body fat, but they're 230-pound linebackers with, who are like freight trains. They're not normal human beings. For most of us normal human beings, a BMI is a pretty good approximation. So if you, have a BMI of 29, but you say, but I'm mostly muscle, you may be, you may be being overly generous to yourself with that term. Just, there's a few people who can say that, but most of us can't. And so this data is that I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you now trends in the weight of the nation over from the mid-'80s until 2010 is the most recent slide. After 2011, the CDC changed the way they collect the data, so some of this is a little outdated. The trends, unfortunately, haven't really slowed down. I'll show you, but so these are it starts in 1985, and you can see the percentage. So this is percent of adults per state with a BMI greater than or equal to 30, so medically qualifying as obese. And so the highest percent here, the darker colors, is 10 to 14%. The white states, not every state was participating. You'll see the states join in. I'm going to go kind of fast through this. I'll stop at a couple points, but I think you're going to see the point here as we go, that the map gets darker as we go along. So here we have a new percentage showing up, and you'll see we can pick on the southeast a lot, and sort of the Appalachian belt, Louisiana, Mississippi, there's West Virginia. So now 15 to 19%, this is adults who are obese. Again, some of you have seen these slides. You've been with me. Here's a new percentage in 1997, greater than or equal to 20%. And there's Mississippi, I think that's Kentucky, Indiana. I don't know my geography. What's that?
That's Indiana.
That's Indiana. Okay. We are into the late 90s. And now greater than 25% in 2001. This is sometimes known as we'll talk about this later, as the diabetes belt, kind of through Appalachia and the south, sort of deep southeast. And it's really attributable to diet and this prevalent weight problem. Now up to 25 to 30%, now greater than 30%. I think that's the last, yeah. So, oops. So that's, again, after this, we're still putting together new slides. The data, the way they collect the data has changed somewhat. So 2010, most of, the way books are published, things are significantly out of date by the time they come to publication. So I was in medical school between 1996 and 2000. I was probably seeing books that had a lot of their stuff maybe from 1990 or who knows. But I some of the data on chronic diseases, prevalence of diabetes and those kind of things were, when I was learning, it was based on what we used to look like. And then as I came into practice, I saw this incredible prevalence in my own practice. I said, geez, everybody I see is diabetic. Everybody's got all these health problems. What is going on? And it really gave me the conviction that clearly there's some big problem, and it's resulting problems. Sorry, I had somebody in the hospital. One second. This is back Fischer.
Let's get some of your breath.
Yeah.
Line to the store.
That's pretty impressive. For
If you guys were wondering whether he's committed to you guys as a physician, he is.
Yes, it could be you. But I do think he's coming back.
Sorry about that. Where was that? This prevalence of illness that's coming with this wave of of weight problems is huge, and you don't have to be a terribly astute doctor to notice that many of these chronic conditions only exist in the patients who are struggling with their weight. So, I really came to the Y and started this program with the hope that we could try to help folks with this, individually with this national trend that's causing so much trouble. Here's another way to look at this. This is by county with from 2009, and the black is greater than or equal to 30% obesity. So again, you kind of see that the diabetes belt here in Appalachia and the Southeast. And this is, I've mentioned diabetes a few times. Some public health, I want to talk some about the consequences of this weight gain. We'll talk a little bit about why it's happened too, or speculate about why it's happened. But the top is the prevalence of obesity, and the bottom is the prevalence of diabetes. And I was going to say, some public health researchers call diabetes diabesity. It's really diabetes follows weight gain as night follows day. It just, they're hand in glove. We're talking about type 2 diabetes, not the type 1 diabetes that children get and are in insulin shots, which is a very small percentage of overall diabetes. This is adult onset diabetes, and we'll talk more about diabetes specifically, I think, next week. But this is probably one of the leading disease indicators that follows the obesity epidemic. Here, this is some, so the data I had from the CDC there ended at 2008. This is a little bit more updated, but and small numbers, but I'll tell you that the minority of us maintain the normal weight. The weight greater, BMI 25, greater than 25, so overweight or obese, that's 70.2% of the population. So most Americans are either overweight or obese. Very few of us maintain a normal weight. And so at 37, so this is the whole adult population based on 2013 to 14, 37.7% of the American population has a BMI of 30 or greater. So 70%, 25 or greater of those, 37% is 30 or greater. And then the extremely obese, there's different categories that are used, but a BMI of 40 or greater is 7.7% of the population. And I'll talk to you about the myriad health consequences, but it's our bodies don't work as well when we are not right-sized, and it causes all kinds of health problems, and those health problems, of course, wind up in the healthcare system, and they cost also a lot of, in aggregate, a lot of money. So there's been several studies on the financial implications. So it was estimated in nationwide that in 2008 we spent $147 billion on healthcare expenditures related to obesity, and that per person it's about a $1,500 increase in annual medical expense if you're obese versus not. This is these are some trends that begin to maybe help us see why some of this is happening. First, what is happening? We look at the average American male in 1984 weighed 168 pounds. In 2004 weighed 180 pounds. We didn't change genetically, we just changed sizes. The average American female weighed 142 pounds in 1984, 152 pounds in 2004. And so getting at pairing that with some other data available through the USDA that collects information on food diaries, on how much people eat, and then also on how much food is available to be eaten. If we look at those times, this last one in 1978, there were 3,200 kilocalories of food. A kilocal is a calorie. A calorie is available to be eaten, on the market. And then in 1978 versus 3,900 per person in 1999. And so there's more food available. People don't produce food without an intent to sell food, and so we are marketed to food is made available to us. The best way to resist temptation is to avoid temptation, right? But it's put all around us, so it makes us harder to resist it. It's in vending machines, even here in the lovely YMCA. There's some vending machines. They're kind of hidden away, but you can find them. There's food is all around us. Soda machines, all that stuff. Somebody's made it, and so there's. It's just harder to say no. Interestingly, these food diaries that are tracked by the USDA by sort of sample surveys showed that the caloric intake during this time that people increased in weight went up by 268 calories in men, 143 calories in women, and that at least in those diaries, it was all those increases were non-meal eating. So the other things that are happening here are these big demographic shifts where people don't gather together at the dinner table, and mom or dad doesn't cook every night, and you don't share a meal. There's a lot more fluid lives and people eating on the run and food all around us, and so even though there's a concern about supersizing, that sort of thing, the bigger problem, if you look at the data, seems to just be raising, the prevalent availability of food, and especially the high calorie foods. Somewhere in that time, I don't know exactly when high fructose corn syrup was developed, but for those of you who don't know, high fructose corn syrup is a way of refining corn to make it into a sweetener, and unintended consequences because of agricultural policy. We made corn really cheap. Corn was produced a lot, and therefore sugar became really cheap, and then we could sweeten everything, and sure enough, in that time, we started sweetening everything. So ketchup has high fructose, everything has high fructose corn syrup in it. Now that's gotten a taint and a bad name, so now you can put like real cane sugar, and that somehow is a compliment. It's still sugar, it's still not real good for you. So, and it's my conviction, and looking at other studies and data, between 1985 and by 1985, our sedentary habits in terms of how we live as a society were pretty well set. We were already in automobile culture in 1985. We already had cities that were not really easily walkable. Our professions, work was already becoming less and less physically demanding. So, as a population, you could argue this on individual levels, but as a population, this is really about the way that the problem with weight is really about the way that we eat. There are a lot of great benefits to exercise, and I champion them all. But if somebody comes to me and says, I really need to lose some weight, doc, sort of the video montage of them putting on a gray sweatsuit and going and training, because that's the only change you're going to make. You're going to have to work out like a madman to lose that weight. You really have to. The thing that's most important for weight control is diet. For weight loss, weight control is a little different matter. Once you achieve your normal weight, exercise is really important for maintaining weight, but it's a hard way to lose weight. So, why does all this matter? How do we get sick when we gain weight? We get sick in all kinds of ways. I tell people, our physiology is different than bear physiology. So bears are supposed to get big and fat and then sleep all summer. They don't get diabetic. They don't get gallstones. They don't get bad sick. That's what they were made to do. We weren't made to do that, apparently, because we don't do well when we get fat and sleep all winter. We get sick, so how do we get sick? We get diabetes, we get high blood pressure, we get high cholesterol, we form gallstones, we get gout, joints go bad quicker. There are multiple cancers that are associated with weight gain because it has hormonal effects when we gain weight. We have a separate talk on sleep apnea, which explain that's just a mechanical problem where if we have too much weight around, especially we men, we put on weight kind of around our neck, and that causes our airway to collapse when we sleep, which is called sleep apnea. Reflux, and anytime we have extra pressure around our middle, the food, normal when we eat, the stomach should be able to dilate and expand. It can't do that right, so your stomach becomes more pressurized, acid tends to go up, get more blood clots, I won't depress you, we get lots of stuff, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff individually, but it really is a problem, and when folks come to me and ask, what can I do to avoid mental decline, dementia. Some of the hard to know what to do about that, but consistently, the thing I read and see says one of the best ways to prevent mental health decline is to maintain good physical health. And so we kind of know that anecdotally, that it's important to our mental health to maintain our physical health. And some of the therapists, especially John Fleming, one of the therapists who I've worked with, is always, people go to him for, it's funny, people come to me for bodily health, and I end up talking about mental health, and people come to him for mental health, and he ends up talking to them about bodily health. You know, these things go together, but he's a therapist who says, you know, if you want to be sound in mind, you've really got to get some exercise and eat right and do all those things. You know, I'm an advocate for fullness of life, not length of life, but you can't live fully if you're not alive, for sure. So as an absolute minimum, that you have to be alive to live well, and you don't live as long when you're obese. There's lots of data to show that, and this shows a couple of big data sets that show you obesity at 40 it results in 7.1 fewer years of life in women and 5.8 fewer years in men in a large data set called the Framingham study. And then another, if your BMI is greater than 45, you lose 13 years of life as a man, 8 years of life as a woman. This is another way of representing that. This is a mortality. It's called the J curve of mortality. Those of you who've been here before have seen this. This is along this axis, the x-axis, yes, along the x-axis, this is BMI. This is BMI of 25 right here and on up. This is a BMI of about 23 or 24, and this lowest point, the black line is men, and the red line is women. As you move up the y-axis, mortality is increasing. So in a population of people, how many people die in a given year? So and so as you move up the x-axis, as you get increased BMI, with increased BMI, the mortality increases. So the lowest mortality is at that BMI of about 23 or 24. If you go too low, you also run into health problems, and that's, you know, that gets into conditions that cause wasting, and so you can be too thin, but clearly it's not good for longevity to be too big. So I'm gonna segue just a little bit to talk about something that I talked about. If you're really, you know, a gunner student and going for an A in this class, and you saw the YouTube of the talk that Liz sent out, I don't know if anybody watched that, but there is a YouTube available of a talk that I gave here at the Y, giving the history of our collaboration together, so this is some from that talk. So I'm just going to pick for a minute. I want to talk about how we handle obesity and chronic health problems in our healthcare system, and contrast that to what we're trying to do here. And so I'm going to pick on this poor man here. I've created a fictional patient. So I want you to look at this side over here first. So this is what we call it, you know, complicated medical patient. He's a 55-year-old man. He has sedentary habits. He's smoked all his life. He has a BMI of 38, and he has all these following diagnoses on his medical chart. He's diabetic. He has high blood pressure. He has gout. He has sleep apnea. He's had a stroke. He has high cholesterol. He has arthritis of the knee. So, is that fella healthy? That's a pretty easy question to answer. He is not healthy, right? This is not health, and what is health is a whole other conversation. But it's often easier to identify, who is healthy and who's not healthy. This person is not healthy, so we take this person to the doctor. We say, "You're not healthy. You need to go see a doctor," and he goes to the healthcare system. And so, what do we do to this person at the doctor? Come to the clinic, put him on a couple of medications for the diabetes, put him on 2 to 3 blood pressure medications. For the gout, he's on something to prevent gout and something that he takes when it flares. for sleep apnea, we've given him a device, it's called CPAP, to prevent sleep apnea. His stroke, he's on a medication to thin the blood to try to prevent another stroke. He's had a prior hospitalization. He's on a statin medicine for his cholesterol, and he's had a total knee replacement, TKA, for his knee. So he's got all these things going on. He's a 55-year-old male who's sedentary, smokes. He's a BMI of 38. He's on all these drugs and these machines. Is he healthy now? Not healthy. He's treated.
He's
and that's-
functioning.
He's functioning. The damage is being contained to some degree, right? But that's not the same thing as health. And a lot of our national conversation tends to go, well, so we spend X trillions of, this is all very expensive, right? So we spend a lot of money on our healthcare system, but we're not healthy. Why is that? Well, we must be doing something wrong in here. If we just do this better, I'm sure that our people would be healthy, and there's certainly things we can do better as a medical system. But the problem with that argument is that all this stuff was never going to make us healthy in the first place. Right? So you can spend all the money you want here, and you're not going to change things until you get to up here, the top part, until you get to the sedentary smoker BMI of 38. If you make that go away, probably almost all of this is going to go away, right? And so, but the healthcare system can't do that to you. There are, so I think that we use the word healthcare and health insurance wrongly, really. We talk about a healthcare system, but it's not a healthcare system, which isn't necessarily a dig on it. It's a sick care system. All that stuff is there to treat you when you're sick. It doesn't make you healthy, and really that's what it's supposed to do. But I think our expectations are wrong, and part of it may be because we call it the wrong thing. It's not health care. It's sick care. Healthcare, on the other hand, tries to get at these at the underlying causes, the upstream causes of unhealth, and there are upstream causes of unhealth that the public health researchers call them the determinants of health. There are determinants of health that are outside of our control, and as a nation we need to sort of try to struggle with those things. The food deserts, the unwalkability of cities are things that make us making the right choices more difficult, but there are a lot of things that are in our control, and those are the things that really healthcare should focus on. So, if we look at what we did to this man when we took him to the healthcare system, which actually is the sick care system, we treated him. But if we brought him to the healthcare system, which is bring him to the Y, put him in involve him in a community group like this, and try to get at those underlying problems and whatever else we might do to try to help that person to aim his life at a healthier thing. Here's a comparison of how I would say, sick care, we wait until you get sick and then we do something to you. Healthcare is proactive. We're trying to get ahead of the problem. Sick care is disease management. That's what we're doing with that. You have these problems, you need these treatments, right? We're talking about disease reversal. You can manage your diabetes, or you can just make your diabetes go away. Sick care is very prescriptive. It's what we do to you. The health care is collaborative. You have to show up. You've got to do this. It's a dance. You've got to do your part. It's not a passive process. Sick care costs a whole lot of money. This is inexpensive and it's low tech. It's not, so inexpensive. Sick care, again, somebody's got to do something to you. You've got to wait for something to be done to heal you, which makes you dependent on others. This is fosters sufficiency. These are things that you have the power to make these changes. We can do these things ourselves with help. Sick care is complicated. This is not complicated. We can make this complicated. That's a good way to sort of make excuses. Well, I'm not sure if I should be doing 10 minutes of cardio and this minutes of this, or I can't make the right decision if I should eat a carrot or a sweet potato. The small choices. You can get lost in the small choices. Don't get lost in the small choices. It's really not complicated. Just that say, there are questions that are legitimate questions that we can ask within this, but this I call the large adjust versus the small adjust. You know, the big, just tune your radio towards the right thing, and the little fine tuning we can do, but we really need to do the big knob first. And as I said before, you know, I care about the length of each of your lives and my life, but what I really care about is fullness of life, and that's what healthcare is aiming at. So I'll close with this. This is I find encouragement from this study. In general, the themes of, you know, as I'll talk about these things over the weeks, I'm going to talk about the things that are discouraging, but then try to end with things that are encouraging. So the discouraging is that we've fallen into this unhealthy patterns as a nation, and we've got wrong expectations of our healthcare system, and so we're perpetually dissatisfied and perpetually broke and getting broker because we're not addressing the root causes of unhealth. And so all that's discouraging. The encouraging thing is that if we make changes in individuals, we can get healthier. And it's well shown in this study out of Norway. This is published many years ago now, in 1993. But there are challenges with studying health habits and how it impacts long-term survival and health, because it's hard to follow people for a long period of time. People move and change places, and there's other confounders that come along. There's genetic variability. There's all kinds of variation. So it's great to study that in a place like Norway, at least historically Norway, where most of the people in Norway are Norwegians, and they don't come and go all that much. They stay in Norway, so a fairly stable population of people with not a lot of genetic variabilities in terms of what makes somebody live longer versus less long. So in Norway, they did this study that lasted for a long time, and they followed folks for 16 years at intake. They took nearly 2,000 men, healthy men, in middle age, who didn't have any, basically they couldn't be sick at enrollment, have no identified problems, and then they sorted them in terms of fitness, and then they just watched what happened to them. So instead of having folks report and say exactly how they ate and how much exercise they did, they did it in a more concrete way. They had them exercise yearly, and they showed how much exercise they could do, so measured their fitness on an exercise bike. And this is what happened. So this was quartile 1 is the least fit, and quartile 4 was the most fit. So you can see that of that group of 2,000 people, in the least fit group, 106 people died in those 16 years. 24 died in the most fit group. One of the things I say about that is that, you know, I have several wonderful graduates of this program who are no longer with us. No matter what we do, we're going to meet our end at some point, and some of the things can't be avoided, or some of the things we don't know how to prevent. All right, so this is not a guaranteed you're gonna live forever program, but a marked difference in mortality between the fit group and unfit group, and particularly if you look at the cardiovascular deaths, so CV deaths, people dying of strokes and heart attacks, and only 11 in the most fit group. Again, which doesn't mean, you know, lots of people point to this book, a guy named Jim Fix, Jim Fix, he wrote a guide to marathon training, and he dropped dead of a heart attack, you know, I think while he was running or something. So people tell me, see, Doc, I told you I wasn't supposed to run. It was a terrible idea. You shouldn't do that. But many fewer Jim Fixes keeled over than couch potato. This is not a risk. It's not risk-free exercise, but overall, it will lead to better health and more years of life. So there are. So that's what I got to say. And I hope you take that as encouragement, but it is discouraging our national state of health. We can do something about it individually, and at least start there. We can do something about it in our own lives. Any questions, comments?
Is there a neck size of men's shirts where I've heard it's 17?
Yeah.
something like that, that where you have to,
Where you have to.
like, go, okay, this might, yes, we need to get work in, or something like that.
Right, yeah, it's that sort of, and we'll talk about that in what Sherry's asking about is sleep apnea. And so as your neck gets thicker, again, assuming you're not the linebacker, your neck is getting thicker because you're gaining weight, and some of that soft tissue, especially here in the front, as when we fall asleep and our jaw relaxes, it just pushes back and closes off the upper part of the airway before the hard rings of the trachea start here at the voice box. And there is a neck size, I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, if you're having to buy larger and larger neck size shirts, that's a sign of trouble, and it probably means that you're snoring, and maybe you're driving your spouse crazy with your snoring. Good. Okay. Well, I'm glad you all joined me on the crusade, rejoined me on the crusade to better health, and so we'll go at it together. We'll do a migration in just a minute. We'll go downstairs. We'll be downstairs in the front fitness studio, right? So we'll sort of lead. Sometimes it feels a little like being in summer camp here. I hope that's, right? We go as a group and we go trooping together, but we'll try not to lose anybody, and you don't have to line up or anything like that. But